right, I'm very excited to have the next two sessions. I'm going to start with Mr. Bryan Rand. We're going to have a conversation on lessons from the middle market. And then when our conversation is concluded, I'm going to invite up Rick Simmons to close out the morning. And then we'll head to lunch. So thank you all for joining us for this. Bryan, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
If we could, Bryan, I would love to start with a deeper, more thorough background than maybe normal. I think you've got a pretty interesting career history. I'd love to really work through that just to establish a great groundwork for the conversation we're going to have that follows. So could you walk us through the last several chapters of your career?
Sure. So, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
And allowing me to speak. So again, my name is Bryan Rand. I run Rand & Co. We are a holding company with a number of platforms across a variety of industries, and we'll talk about that in a minute. As far as my background, I'm from Indianapolis originally, Morehouse undergrad. Out of Morehouse, went and did the kind of banking private equity route at Credit Suisse. Went to HBS for business school, went back to Credit Suisse, and frankly, would have spent my whole life and career there. When the market blew up in 08, 09, I was an associate in the private equity group, partnered with the gentleman who ran the special situations group at Credit Suisse. And very long story short, we bought his book from the bank. And it was, 80% seller financed by the bank, literally spring 09, and ended up having a really good outcome. And so, a year and a day later, after the wire crossed, kind of woke up and said, hey, I didn't want to be his, junior guy forever, which, by the way, he's done super well. Maybe not the best move, but was spending some time doing some kind of direct investing and advising because I, had some capital and wanted to be scrappy. And did, a number of transactions. One of the companies that I advised and then invested in was a company called Vacation Innovations. So if you want to buy, sell, or rent, exchange a company in the timeshare market, they're the dominant player. 8 of the first 10 links on Google are in the VI family of brands. I invested when the company was small, and it kind of took off in a very American dream type of way. In 2017, we sold a third of that company to Tritium Partners, private equity. We just really hit it off. And when Tritium raised their second fund, I actually joined as a partner. And into that tenure, the current CEO, the CEO at that time, went to Salt Lake City with his 6 kids, went to his family and to focus on his family, and the president went to the CEO role, and I went to president. So I was really wearing 2 hats. And so, that was that background, sort of working at Tritium as a partner, trying to drive, value at VI, where I'm still very active today. But the backdrop for Rand & Co. is through some of those successes was able to develop some liquidity and really have been foot on the gas in doing private deals where we see outsized opportunity. So I think you can kind of think of it as I've had some great experiences sitting on each side of the table, both as an investor, operator, and advisor.
Awesome. Can you give us a quick just flavor of what's in the Rand & Co. portfolio today, either by size or industry or geo, just a little context on maybe the size and scope?
Sure. So, for every company that we have, we're either the majority owner, or we are the largest non-founder owner, or if we're actually a smaller investor, we're the investor who's on the board directing capital markets activity, right? So kind of think of it as, we're very involved in the deal part of the business. So if you think about the portfolio, some of the companies that we have, we own a large manufacturer of steel furniture that we bought earlier this year. We've got a government contractor where we service the Patent and Trade Office at scale. We've got a staffing operation down in South Florida where we have a stake and use that to help across our businesses. Obviously, I'm an owner and partner in Vacation Innovations in a meaningful way. On the food and beverage side, We've got a meaningful stake in a chain of 27 sports bars. We've got some direct ownerships where we own, for the restaurant people in here, sort of a, 8-figure one-store restaurant in Atlanta, as well as a number of other platforms. We've got half a dozen dental practices. Again, as we said, we're foot on the gas in our what we're trying to build.
Awesome. Appreciate the background. When you and I had a conversation about this conversation today, one of the big topics on your mind was this concept of approaching middle market transactions, and even the lower middle market, with humility. Can you talk about why that is important for you? Where did that observation first come from?
Well, sure. Well, first, I want to start off by saying reasonable people can disagree. So, when I hear the kind of ETA, kind of Twitter ecosystem,
There's nothing like that here. There's nobody here on Twitter. Nobody here is interested in buying businesses.
I felt like one of the voices that was missing is that, in my experience, middle market business owners are not sophisticated deal people, but they are often very smart business people. And I don't necessarily see that folks always acknowledge that.
That's not the stereotype.
Yeah, right. That's this idea that, oh, I'm going to go into this sweaty business or this dirty business in the Midwest, and because of my Stanford MBA, I'm just going to go out compete. It just hasn't been my experience or my reality. That I think that folks don't necessarily appreciate the value of years or decades of experience and family relationships, that understand the nuances of competing off in the wild versus sort of what their experience had been in some of the other training grounds.
So we just went through your resume, and you're an industry professional. You've done a lot of transactions. When you think about this concept of humility, how do you approach that with the transactions you're doing today? You easily have a resume that could impress anybody you're talking to based on your career. How does humility play a role in your conversations?
Well, sure. I mean, I think, from my perspective, we like to interact with, an entrepreneur, a founder, an owner, and say, we think we can really be the best partner for your business. We're not trying to steal this business. We believe this is a fair market price. Now, let me tell you why we can grow the pie so big that we don't need to argue about the slices. And what I found in the middle market, and that's from both, micro market all the way through, sub-billion-dollar private equity, is that there's this approach that folks think they're going to pick off an entrepreneur, that they're going to make their money from stealing it from them on the buy. And in my experience, one, that's not even how I've seen value truly delivered over time. But more importantly, it's not a life I want to live, and it's not even a way I want to partner.
So you talked about driving value. If we take this premise that we're paying fair market value and nobody's stealing businesses, what are some ways you've seen that are super effective at driving enterprise value in these transactions?
Well, let me break that into two pieces. So I would say, as far as driving equity value to us as owners, I would say people say, oh, there's no more financial engineering in private equity. I've not found that to be true at this segment where we are.
Say more.
Right. So, for instance, for sub $5 million EBITDA businesses, there are meaningful opportunities on the sale leaseback side where people have their real estate marked versus what's available from the sale leaseback providers. It's a meaningful way to reduce price. We've employed it, that aggressively working through sort of the cash flow lending community, that there's a lot of places where if you can kind of cut the price with the sale leaseback, you can get 3.5 times on a cash flow loan, maybe add some structure on the back end. There's some opportunities to own and drive value in a business where just a straight regular way LBO, where you don't need to defy gravity, can really drive some interesting returns.
You started with equity value. What's the other place for driving value?
So just on the enterprise value side, we're a big fan of what we call unfair fights. When we do a deal, it's not super complex, but we kind of have 4 metrics. So the first thing I say is, hey, the business has to matter, right? So we look at a lot on food and beverage. From our perspective, and again, there's somebody in here probably really good at franchise, we haven't seen a lot of unfair fights. That if your neighborhood Arby's closed, who would care? Versus we like to have a restaurant where if it's one box, hey, when the president comes to town, is that where they would go, right? So the business has to matter.
Two, it's our CEOs. We don't do any tourists. No guys guys in blue jackets or girls in pencil skirts talking about some idea. We want someone who has run a P&L at that size before. We've done really well with people who've run a P&L but have not had that CEO title, and that are scrappy but have kind of a demonstrated track record of excellence. Three, we need to see a potential for scale. So I will do a deal with 200,000 of EBITDA if we really see a path to 10 million of EBITDA. And then we say four, we need to see exceptional deal terms. Like, we're not getting out of bed for returns that you wouldn't even say publicly, right? That are a big number for this level of risk. And so when you do that and you have those pieces in place, we feel like we have a good alchemy for good tailwinds and driving a good outcome if the deal's been set up right.
How do you think about the difference in value add between your efforts as a sponsor or private equity firm and then the efforts that the operators or managers put into the business? Back to that like allocator versus operator dynamic. How does that play into value creation, and what do you think about there?
Honestly, I probably don't think of it that way, right? When we say partnership, we really mean it. And one of the ways that I feel like, we can win deals where we can say is, when I say partnership, I mean it. So what I find in so many, mid-market private equity firms is, you open up some website with the cityscape and four folks with their arms crossed and they say we're partners in X. But their partnership means if you are above X of EBITDA, if you're in these industries, if you can sell me 51%, if you're willing to let me use my rented money to buy it for Y years. And that's not always appealing to folks. And so where we do it, it's true partnership. And so kind of going to the entrepreneurs, right? We've got some exceptional CEOs who are really like, hey, when it's time to refinance the loans, I want you to worry about it. We've got other folks who are saying like, hey, I've got to get on the phone with these vendors, I need your help. So there's a whole kind of variety there, and sort of we don't, I think, necessarily think of it as sort of one way to partner or create value.
Where do you get a lot of your deal flow from these days? Where does Rand & Co source?
Right. So from our perspective, I was having this conversation during the break. Our time between meeting an entrepreneur and a wire crossing is probably one of the longest in this room, and we're totally fine with that, right? So
how long is it?
I mean, I talked with my colleague. I mean, it's easily north of a year and a half, 2 years. We've got some that have been 4 years. And from our perspective, I'm just very unlikely to get a book from a mid-market banker or business broker and say, wow, this business that I didn't know, run by a stranger who I don't know, is amazing, and I'm going to go find a CEO who I don't know and drive a great outcome with money from someone else that I don't know.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, like that's not how it's worked. But what has worked well is because I'm in certain businesses, because we try and treat people fairly, because we kind of partner in ways where there's a true win-win, we get introduced to opportunities. I think we kiss more frogs than other folks, but we will run down the line on opportunities and be opportunistic. And what I found is that $250,000 EBITDA business that so many folks would ignore, from our perspective, we're getting paid to do business development. That person is going to be in rooms, they're going to be able to vouch for us. There's no more effective way for us to close on somebody to say, please talk to 4 of our other CEOs. We don't need to coach them, we don't need to say anything. And so from our perspective, that building that kind of ecosystem is how we've done it and how we think about it.
Would you describe your pipeline as full of proprietary off-market deals, a lot of broker interactions, banker interactions? How do you think about that?
So there's a mix. I think, and we've talked about, because I feel a way about the word proprietary.
Say more.
I think there's this romance around proprietary transactions in the mid-market that I don't necessarily agree with. That I think for those of you who consider yourself deal people, the smartest and largest and most financially successful firms only buy through intermediated processes. They're buying from the biggest, smartest bankers. They're buying public companies. And so just this idea that the only way you can make money is by buying a company from an entrepreneur who should have hired a banker, but you got in front of them, that's just not my experience. I will say, frankly, for some of the businesses that I think folks in this room are buying, it's really helpful to have a banker. That after you adjust for the time, for their understanding of the terms, what the process will be like getting it closed, I think there is some value. So we've had a number of opportunities where we've reached out to someone, we've gotten to know each other through the years. They thought that, there was a misalignment between sort of where we were and what their expectations were. They've hired a banker. We still got the deal done. It generally ends up at a price we're happy with, but them having someone to explain the deal process more than paid for itself on both our fronts.
So you would not say you've seen a lot of off-market deals with excess value just included for free. That's a...
It just hasn't been my experience,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I'm not saying that they are not out there, but it's also not even what we're attempting to do, right? I see a lot of folks in the kind of tech-enabled service and software space, and they want to find that guy with 6 million, 7, 8 million of ARR who just doesn't know that they should sell it for Y price. That we're not even fishing in those pools, nor do we want those outcomes.
So how do you think about standing out in a competitive process? What are like genuine reasons why you can go to an entrepreneur and say, hey, we've been in this 2-year relationship, you didn't like the price, you hired a banker, you still don't like the price, but I'm still your best buyer. Like, how do you make that pitch? What are some like real motivating reasons for anybody, not just Rand & Co., but what are the
Sure.
real motivations to be the best buyer for an asset?
I think one of the things I learned post-CS advising on deals is the real appreciation for speed and certainty that so many entrepreneurs have. And it's very rare in a process where they interact with, for whenever there are professional buyers of businesses, you're generally having people who often went to the same 20 schools, they worked at the same 4 or 5 banks or 3 consultancies, or they have the same type of entrepreneurial experience, and they all sound exactly alike. And so for you to get in and say, like, I'm the best buyer for your business, I've lined up a potential CEO.
Aren't they all going to say that?
No one ever says it. No one ever actually says, I'm the best guy, I will close this deal on LOI on time.
You're bringing a level of conviction and passion to
Right.
the conversation that you don't see your competitors leveraging.
Right, and not just my competitors. I mean, I spent years in the middle market kind of at the table hoping that the LOIs would come in, hoping that people would play nice. And I think they haven't seen, hey, I'm an experienced, smart person, so if you've done one before, talk to the folks who I haven't, or leveraging the fact that you haven't done one and say, I'm betting everything, we will close this, I've lined up the money. And then if you haven't done that, then you probably don't have an appreciation for the gravity of this game.
Back to the idea of like competitive processes, speed and certainty is great. People love to know, hey, there's cash, it's available, this is going to happen. What about other deal dynamics? What else stands out in your mind of its, I don't know, post-closing obligation, structure, risk? What other things do you leverage in competitive processes to win deals?
So what I've found is one of the things that we do on our team is we're a big fan of chew people's food for them. We know the deal process. So at each stage of the deal, we're really thinking about each person on the table. And so whether that is banker, whether that is lender, whether that's attorney or the seller, and say, what exactly are they going through? And we will crank out a lot of paper. We will make sure that we have done people's committee memos for them. We want to, the model and memo for our lender will be better than whatever they've seen. For our sellers, we know exactly what their concerns are. We want to jump in front of those with paper, with thought. And again, these are things that anybody can do, but you do actually have to do the work, that it's easy to talk about it. But when you've kind of chewed your food for them, it sticks out relative to folks who are, playing deal guy.
I've got 1 or 2 last things on my mind, and then we'll open it up for any Q&A. Are there any deals in the pipeline right now? Anything you're excited about at Rand & Co.? You closed the deal earlier this year. What's coming down the pike for you?
So certainly, we are, under LOI, continuing to partner with businesses we're super excited about in the food and restaurant space, where we're building a platform in Atlanta that we're excited about. We've got partners we love, where we think there's unfair fights, right? Where we can say, hey, these are businesses that are generally tough businesses, but we're in a position where
restaurants is not the first category that the private equity pedigree guy comes in and says he's trying to buy up. That's a competitive edge right there, just the market you're fishing in.
Right, and we're in a position where I think our credibility is super high. There's the kind of onesie twosie restaurants with kind of iffy and pricing and economics, and then there's the where the big PE guys play. But there's this niche of restaurants that deeply matter to their local communities, that have very strong economics. We had this really interesting use case with COVID where we can see who really matters and who didn't. And so we're growing that portfolio, as well as we're doing some, we do some growth partnerships where we are just partner with an entrepreneur and start from zero. And those have been some of our biggest business, and we're doing some of those now.
Are all the restaurants in Atlanta, or are they spread out?
So in the Southeast.
I'm going to call you for a food tour next time I'm in town.
Let's do it.
Aside from restaurants, then we'll do Q&A next. Are there any deals? I can hear the passion around restaurants and some of that. Are there any other sectors or deal types or criteria where you feel like you're the best buyer? Is there a place where you have a competitive edge at Rand & Co?
So there's a couple ways. So one, I wouldn't just say it's restaurants. I think we're passionate about that. We love all the kids equally, right? But when it comes to sort of where we're the best buyer, I'd kind of pull up a little bit and say, hey, I think we want to be the best. Truly, we're purpose built to be the best partner to market leading private companies, and that's like jargony, but we want to demonstrate it. And so, both the companies we buy or the companies we found, we're building a real layer of talented folks who can support growth and really kind of leveraging both talent. At the end of the day, I just think you can't replace having just A-plus athletes. We're leveraging technology in a big way, and relationships. And so I know that sounds cliche, but we live it every day.
Is there anything else on your mind with the broad topic of ETA and approaching the middle market with humility that we didn't get to before we do Q&A? Anything else burning a hole in your pocket?
This is great. I just wanted to, I read so much and I consume a lot of ETA Twitter, as we talked about. Like, for me to be risk on, for me to be foot on the gas, I've felt like it made sense for me to consume it and not jump into the conversation, right? Because it allows me to operate most effectively. But what I would say is just, I see a lot of certainty. I heard one of the other speakers mention it earlier. Like, it depends is a great answer. And it's the answer that I find really smart people respect the most, and I don't hear it enough.
Awesome. We've got time for just a couple of questions, if anybody has one for Bryan. I see somebody finger. Hey. Let's go front row, then we'll go back row. So that question, for those of you who didn't hear it, was just thinking about the time allocation between Rand & Co., the holding company, and the portfolio companies that you're operating.
It's a great question. Right now, I'm doing this because I think it's a great way to live a life, to build an integrated and happy life where I can use my work life to kind of affect the world I want to be in. And so I don't really spend a lot of time differentiating between creating value in somewhere where we've invested or partnered versus at Rand & Co. I view them as symbiotic, right? And so there are times where, hey, us bringing on certain resources to lighten the load, maybe in one company, but should work across all of our holdings, makes a lot of sense. But it's really symbiotic, right? We have a team of folks who are all kind of rowing the boat in the same direction. And so we don't do as much of that differentiation, for good or bad. But that's kind of how I would answer that one.
The question was around the comment about win-win environments and any incentive structures you found to be helpful in deals you've done.
Sure. So there's a ton. One that pops to mind off of that question is, from our perspective, there's a couple kind of axioms we use, right? If we're buying control, 50% or more, 51% of the business or more, then we want to be pari passu. We're all in the same boat. If we're the minority, then we need to be senior. And then what I've also done, and with our team, that we think we'll see if it creates a lot of value, but it helps me sleep a lot better, is we generally structure an option to buy more of the company. When there's just a disagreement about price, when there's a disagreement about ownership, especially when we're a minority owner, we want a right to buy more. And we can price it at a high level, but it kind of gives me that home run insurance, right? Where I don't want something to just run away from me and I spend the rest of my life saying, man, I should have owned more. That, we view as, one, I sleep better at night, and then two, as we do more deals, that actually becomes a valuable asset that over time we can talk to capital sources and partners about owning more. And it's a way to get it without having to deploy the dollars today and having the fist fight today. And frankly, the kinds of owners and operators we're dealing with often don't value those in the same way that we do. So that's just an example.
If anybody in the audience has one, we can do one last one. If not, I've got one for you. I'll just do a quick scan. I see. Go ahead. Sean's asking about the options to buy additional equity in minority deals. How do you structure those? Pre-negotiated on terms?
So for us, we're very disciplined about multiples, but when I'm negotiating with mid-market entrepreneurs, I almost never use multiples. Because the truth is, most of the time they don't care, right? And so we will generally communicate it in the form of a fixed value, but we are very thoughtful about what is this industry multiples, what do we think could happen, how is this a discount to where we would actually transact? But we normally communicate it as a number. It's higher than their current value. The entrepreneurs are generally focused on what their wire is and not what that option is. And so we hope will be a big value driver over time.
I'll close with one last one. As you think about the growth for Rand & Co., how are you going to fund this? You're buying across the spectrum of industries, various sizes. How are you thinking about capitalizing Rand & Co.?
Well, we've been fortunate that we're generating a significant amount of free cash flow now, that we're part of an ecosystem of folks who are much deeper wallets. And what I found in just my years around the table is that the deal is really the differentiated piece. And so if we have something that we think is just an unfair fight, we're willing to write, a meaningful check. We've brought in folks we care about. We found a CEO. I've just never found capital to be the issue in that scenario. And so for us, the capital markets have evolved to a point where if we love the opportunity, finding the money is like literally the last thing we're worried about.
Awesome. Cool. Appreciate your time and advice today, Bryan. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. God bless.